good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining today's webinar. This is Tom Banke with Forward Community Investments, and we're excited to have you join us today for the presentation. Before we get going, I'd like to take this opportunity to share some background of how we got here today. Forward Community Investments has worked with Wisconsin nonprofits for almost 20 years. We build capacity in nonprofits through low-cost loans and expert advisory services. As the most established financial management advisor of its kind in Wisconsin, FCI provides its clients with guidance, resources, skills, and capacity building as a means of building strong, secure, and sustainable communities, one nonprofit at a time. Wisconsin nonprofits are faced with many complex problems today. Based on a Forward Community Investments 2012 survey of the nonprofit sector across Wisconsin, 58% reported expenses increasing, while only 37% reported revenue increases. It's a fragile financial cycle that has been challenging for most, and making strategic leadership efficient use of financing is ever so important. Well, the good news is that with the support of BMO Harris Bank, FCI is offering a series of webinars to augment the Building Financial Sustainability, a Virtual Leadership Series, and to further build nonprofit effectiveness. A year ago, Harris and M&I came together to form BMO Harris Bank, a strong U.S. bank that offers more for the customers and communities it serves. BMO Harris Bank is an active partner in Wisconsin communities and demonstrates strong corporate citizenship as an important part of whom they are and how they approach community. We thank BMO Harris Bank for their support to provide Building Financial Sustainability, a Virtual Leadership Series for Wisconsin's nonprofit community. Today's topic is social innovation, presented by David Bornstein, a leading author and journalist on social innovation, Jeff Snell, a special advisor to the president at Marquette University, and Sally Martiniak of Forward Community Investments. Before I get into the bios, I'd like to take this opportunity to kind of orient everybody into the how we're going to go forward with today's webinar. We do have some slides, and there's some housekeeping. So on the previous slide, there was a phone number that everybody should call in. We recommend using this path to hearing as opposed to your computer speakers. We have found that using your computer speakers provides some feedback. So the phone number should be available to everyone. You should have gotten an email when you had registered. And there will also be, if you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to send those to us. We'll be actively going through those and bringing those questions up throughout the webinar. So we very much would love your participation in that realm. There'll be a few polls that we'll be asking of all the attendees today. Very simple polls. It'll pop up on your screen, and just answer the question as honestly as possible, and we'll also be reporting those out as well throughout the call. I spoke a little bit about the questions as well, and just feel free to use those, the question box or the chat box, and we will make attention to those as they come in. So we'd like to thank you for that. And then now I'd like to get into a little about the speakers who will be joining us today. First off, we have David Bornstein, who is a leading author and journalist on social innovation. David Bornstein is a journalist and author who focuses on social innovation. He co-authors the Fixes column in the New York Times Opinionator section, which explores and analyzes potential solutions to major social problems. He is the co-founder of the Solutions Journalism Network, which supports journalists who report on constructive responses to social problems. His books include How to Change the World, Social Entrepreneurs and the Power of New Ideas, The Price of a Dream, The Story of the Grameen Bank, and Social Entrepreneurship, What Everyone Needs to Know, which we will actually be giving a copy away to an attendee today who participates in our webinar. He is currently completing a book on social innovation in the U.S. and Canada, and he currently lives in New York. Jeff Snell will be joining us today, and he is the special advisor to the president at Marquette University. He leads Marquette University's Social Innovation Initiative, which promotes the field as a powerful tool for interdisciplinary learning and a framework for life. The program's developments to date include founding the Midwest Consortium for Social Innovation, a partnership with the New York Times Fixes You, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Brady Corporation Midwest Social Innovation Design Contest, the first regional platform, the Executive Education Social Innovation Leadership Experience, graduate and undergraduate course design and teaching, and the first university-backed feasibility study to explore a crystal ray network school in Milwaukee. Our last presenter today is Sally Martiniak, who is the president of Forward Community Investments. She became the executive director of FCI in 2003, when it was still known as the Dane Fund. Under her direction, FCI has expanded the scope of its services to include providing vital technical assistance and financial management advice to nonprofits through workshops and seminars across the state. Sally appreciates the challenge of working with nonprofits in every corner of the state. As the only Wisconsin-based loan fund dedicated to working with nonprofits, it means that FCI has a challenge and corresponding opportunity to reach 16,000 plus nonprofit organizations in Wisconsin. So with that, at this time, I'd like to turn the call over to Sally, who will be running the webinar this afternoon. And take it away, Sally.
Thank you very much, Tom. And I can tell you again, in terms of how excited we are to have both David Bornstein and Jeff Snell with us on this call. I've just had the privilege of knowing Jeff for a number of years since we expanded statewide. We met through another colleague. And the work that Marquette is doing in social innovation, not only in Milwaukee but in the Fox Valley, is to be commended. They've really looked at the opportunity of taking social innovation into the nonprofit world in the Fox Valley area and giving people sort of that new lease on life in terms of how to really look at those social problems and how to solve them and resolve them rather than just band-aiding them. And with that, what I'm going to do is present both Jeff and David. And I'd like to add too that this is going to be, as far as the webinar itself, it's going to be a very conversational webinar. So it's not going to be one that relies on slides, but rather one that relies on the knowledge, the experience of Jeff and David to share with us their journey into social innovation. So with that, I'm going to present the first question, and that is social innovation or social entrepreneurship has been described as a field dedicated to solving social problems. What exactly do you see in your journey through social innovation are the challenges of implementing a culture of social innovation? David? Jeff?
So you want me to jump in first?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, there's so many. Thanks so much. What are the challenges well, can I take a step back and just sort of say, like, what is social entrepreneurship, or should I do that? Would that be helpful?
That would be fabulous.
You know, just, yeah. So, so basically, I mean, the term social entrepreneurship has been used to describe a very, very large collection of kind of initiatives that, you know, it's sort of a catch-all. Some of them are sort of when people are trying to solve social problems, but they bring in sort of business elements like a revenue model, or they think how can we make it sustainable? How can we capture revenues through a sort of a market approach? Other times it's people working through a traditional nonprofit, but applying some of the frameworks that have been very, very helpful in business, like segmenting a market, or, you know, developing an evidence-based approach to measure, you know, a measurement-based or an evidence-based approach to sort of knowing whether or not you're having a particular impact on your target clientele that then drives a kind of performance culture. So it's many, many different things, and I think the first thing that people really want to ask themselves is, when they're thinking about social entrepreneurship, what are they really thinking of? What are they thinking about? What I call social enterprise, which would be people essentially running businesses to solve social problems, or alternatively running nonprofits, but thinking about revenue as earned revenue as a very key strategy to how they're doing things. If that's the case, then they should really look at what social enterprise is and many examples of that. If people are thinking more broadly about the idea of social entrepreneurship, which is sort of how you can have a very broad, which is sort of an effort to address the question, how can you have a very broad systematic impact on a problem with very, in some cases, modest resources? And that's really some of the challenges that social entrepreneurship tries to get to. The question of leverage. How do we address this problem such that 20 years from now we're not going to be attacking the same problem using, some of the same methods? We'll have really dramatically changed the situation. We'll have other problems, but hopefully better problems. I think those are the main things that I think of when I'm thinking more broadly about what social entrepreneurship is.
And along those lines, could you offer some examples for the audience as far as something that they would be familiar with?
Yeah, sure. So let's consider sort of one example of an organization that I've written about in my column in the Times. It's an organization called Health Leads. It was started by college students and has now been operating for about, I think, 14 years. Basically, what they do is they bring on volunteers. They have about 1,000 volunteers now, who come into pediatric wards within large public hospitals. These are hospitals that serve very low-income families by and large. And what they do is, there's a problem in our public hospitals whereby many, many low-income families will come in a kind of emergency way. The kids will have asthma, or there'll be an infectious, an infection or something like that, a lung infection or something. And the doctors very often will treat the symptoms and send the family home to the same housing conditions and the same social conditions that very often produce the illness in the first place. Bad housing is one of the primary causes of bad health, especially in inner cities. And so the question was, how do we address in a systematic way what we call the social determinants of health? How could our health system do that? The doctors don't have time. The social workers don't have enough time. They're just dealing with cases of neglect and abuse. There's 20,000 patient visits for one social worker in a typical large public hospital. So the question that this organization, Health Leads, it was started by a woman named Rebecca O'Neill, who's a classic social entrepreneur, is how do we address this problem? How can we bring into the health system a way of addressing the social determinants of health such that when a family comes in and the problem is the housing, we not only have the family see a doctor, but we connect them to legal service. That sort of systemic response. And what they've done is they've trained a lay force, and they've worked with now 20 different very large public hospitals, and they've started getting these social prescriptions into the medical health record, the electronic medical record, so that it becomes part of the decision-making thinking of health professionals, nurses and doctors, when they see these families. And they do it by having these what they call family health desks staffed by volunteers who are mostly students in the hospitals. The students tend to be pre-med students in many cases, so they as health professionals are being developed as future doctors who have a real deep insight into these social determinants. So that's an example of an organization that's trying to address a problem in a more systematic way than just sort of one case at a time. Is that a useful example?
Yes, that is. And one of the things, if I can also ask Jeff to talk a little bit about how Marquette and why Marquette became involved in the area of social innovation and how your paths crossed with David.
Sure. Thank you, Sally, and a pleasure to be with David. Any opportunity to learn from him and work with him is just a pleasure, and thank you so much for the invitation. And I will answer your question, and I'll get there starting with one that was posed a little bit earlier, and see if I can wed a couple other models in there too, because those are such powerful stories. And before we sign off, I wonder if David could make sure that he shares the spelling or the name of the organization for those that want to go back to his column, or maybe do a deeper dive on the social entrepreneur, Rebecca, or the model in particular. Because those stories are so compelling about what good social innovation and social entrepreneurship is all about, what the good chief characteristics are when we talk about identifying a root cause, looking for recurring revenue for financial sustainability through product, good, or service, scale, replication, and then just good, clear social metric about what we mean by social impact or creating social value. And on that count, by the way, since David mentioned the healthcare, I'd like to throw 2 cents in for Aravind. David's written about it, and it's the Aravind, A-R-A-V as in Victor, I-N-D, Aravind Eye Care Hospital. And you'll find it on YouTube. It's about a 6-minute watch, and you will not finish the day without feeling inspired if you want to invest 6 minutes and look at a really cool model of social entrepreneurship, again in healthcare. Harvard Business School case study. My grad students and the undergrads love it because it's so clear and compelling and really exemplifies those characteristics that I was mentioning at the top. And then since we're on healthcare, and that's a field that I think we would all agree we're facing some significant challenges, let's throw education in the mix. And you could talk about Jill Violet, V-I-A-L-E-T. Jill Violet and Playworks is another really neat model that drives educational achievement at the primary and middle school levels. I think she's received about a $30 million investment by some funders, a foundation, to help scale her model nationally. And then since immigration is hot on the list right now in terms of what our Congress is looking at, be sure to look at Jane Liu, L-E-U, Jane Liu's model well, she was the founder, I should say. She's not there presently. She's off being a serial entrepreneur, doing yet another really cool venture. But Jane founded Upwardly Global, and that's a really neat model for tapping recent highly educated immigrants that come to this land of opportunity but then get marginalized for some reasons that she identified as a root cause, and then built a pipeline of talent that helps solve that problem and becomes a very sustainable model with multiple offices in multiple cities in the U.S. Anyway, I think the work at Marquette, we're a Catholic Jesuit school, and I add that only because there was high alignment between this idea of engaging the world to be part of the solution to its challenges. There's high alignment between that call of social innovation and social entrepreneurship and the Catholic Jesuit mission and identity. However, other schools have weighed in because the value proposition might be a little bit different, and maybe it's a call for leadership, civic engagement. So there are different facets to this gem of social innovation that make more sense to certain institutions than, say, engage the world to be part of the solution to its great challenges, and that fits so beautifully with Jesuit Catholic mission and identity. And part of the model of good social innovation, social entrepreneurship, then shows what that looks like, because language is clunky and sometimes it's cloudy at best. And so to give examples of how you can, using this framework for life, be an agent of positive social change, irrespective of walk, if you're one in 1,000 cubicles, or if you want to be like Rebecca or Jane or Jill and be your own social entrepreneur. It's a really beautiful framework for life. The students, and I won't go long on this, but I think there's a call we all share. It's a way of sort of responding to the philanthropic impulse that is wired into every one of us to want to know that we genuinely have significance and impact. And so this framework about being this agent of positive social change, a tool for addressing social problems and helping find solution, it's a big tent. And a lot of people can step into that and discover self-agency. And what I mean by that, as I end in answer to your question, is simply that we find out that individually we have the capacity to actually change systems, to address market failures, and that and then it feels good. We know it's part of the wiring in each one of us to want to have that sense of significance, that we're not placed here at this point in time with these challenges, these gifts and abilities that each one of us possess. We were not put here to amass as much wealth as possible and then fly off to a part of the country and disengage as much as possible for the sake of serenity and peace of mind. But on the contrary, we are here for a purpose. We are here with these gifts, these abilities, and the challenges in front of us. Precisely, we can be part of the solution. And in that sense, we sort of honor that philanthropic impulse. We see human dignity, we see opportunity to increase human capacity, and guess what? As human beings, we find that really fulfilling and really beautiful. So that's part of why I think it works so well at Marquette, part of why I think it works well at other institutions, what they're trying to accomplish as they have formative years with young people. And it was really in doing that that we fell in love with David's work, because I have to tell you, it's such a centerpiece for the curriculum that we've worked to design here at Marquette. And using his books and his scholarship and the stuff that he's been producing with the Times, it's a natural to hold up a figure that's had such influence around the world and brought the field to their understanding. It's a natural to say, hey, would you come and hang out with us for a little while, and what could we work on together? And that's the project that we're doing presently, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So I promise my future answers will not be that long and wordy, but I wanted to.
Thank you, Jeff. And David, this question is for you. You know, one of the things that we hear about in terms of examples of social innovation is the fact that they're new organizations. But social innovation also means thinking differently within an existing organization. And what do you see, what are some of those challenges as far as implementing a socially innovative culture within an organization, and how have you seen that done successfully within existing organizations?
That's such a good question. And I just want to thank Jeff for his kind words. I have enjoyed every moment I've spent in Milwaukee, including the beer that has been foisted upon me. It's such a good question. I think, one of the big drivers of social innovation and social entrepreneurship around the world is what you can think of as the spread of agency. The sheer number of people around the world and in every community who have capacity, confidence, access to information, access to education to actually be change agents is on the rise. It's dramatically on the rise in the developing world. But if you look back the United States circa 1960 and the United States circa 2013, in every community there's more people who have more access to a middle-class life, to usually, if not a good education, some college education, and global media, of course. So the spread of agency is such that more people in every community have the ability to be change makers and the ability to be creative actors. So what does that mean for any particular institution? Well, every institution is made up of a bunch of people. Historically, a lot of our institutions, and many still run this way, on the premise that we know what we're doing, we got to go find a bunch of people to execute against our plan, and hopefully they're competent. The world that we're entering now is much more of a world that's driven by radically fast-paced change. We really don't know what we need to be doing tomorrow. The changes in our communities, if we're looking at the health challenges, certainly the challenges vis-a-vis economic opportunity and how to prepare people, how to educate people for this, the dramatic new health challenges because of what we're seeing in demographics in terms of obesity and diabetes and all these problems. I mean, every organization has to now be filled with a whole bunch of people who are innovators, who are coming up with new ideas. And what does the organization do with all of these sort of innovators within? Do they dismiss them and say, no, that's not the way we do things here? Do they accept every single idea and try it out? What are the skills that these people need to have in order to be able to say, hey, I've got an idea. I'd like to pull together a team and let's try something out and we'll evaluate it. Well, they need team building skills, they need leadership skills, they need to have a whole series of social and emotional competencies to be able to work with other people. They probably need to be able to make a reasonable budget too. So the challenges now at the organizational level are very dramatic if you want to really build up a culture where you dramatically increase the number of people who could be creative actors. So from a management point of view, creating a culture, a storytelling culture that tells people they have the permission to experiment, and that's something that we value. From the point of view of elementary school education, helping children grow up seeing that the most important thing that they should be doing is coming up with ideas and trying them out every day in school from the time that they're 4 or 5 years old. I think that really that's the logical implication of social entrepreneurship is dramatically unleashing the agency that is now much more ripe for the picking, so to speak, for society, and harnessing it to good uses, to things that we as collectively decide is what we want as a society.
So again, in terms of that training and, and just really creating that different culture, one of the things too in terms of looking at social innovation, you also think about, you always think about is it a nonprofit, is it a for-profit, and we see those lines blurring within the sectors. How do you also address that in terms of what's happening, and for a nonprofit to possibly work with a for-profit in designing and collaborating in creating that new model for problem solving?
I mean, Jeff, you want to answer that, or should I jump in?
Sure. I was thinking, I think what Greg Dees was getting after in the blurring of the lines, and when he brought that phrase to what is now sort of conventional discussion around social entrepreneurship and social innovation was, in some ways, well, are you trying to achieve a social good, or are you trying to make a profit? Are you nonprofit, or are you for-profit? And since he wrote that and then revised it, there's been, I think, finally some meaningful expressions in response to the tension that we're sort of forcing on people to say, pick one. And the response by a lot of the young people, aspiring leaders, aspiring business people, is that I don't accept your terms. I will make a living, but I will also have a life. I will know that I need to achieve self-sufficiency and have profitability without apology, but I also will have impact on my community and a certain target population, perhaps, or on the environment, and pick your sector in the space of healthcare, education, etc. So you now see legal and financial infrastructure growing in response to the pushback that they don't accept the either-or. They live in the blurred space, but live there happily and have said, you respond to what I want to accomplish. And so the benefit corporations, for example, or the L3Cs, something more than a dozen states now recognizing these legal entities. And also, I would say the social venture capital firms, just as one iteration of how there's now capital flowing behind the deals, the enterprises, the ventures. So you start to see, even in the last decade, but I would defer to David, who's watched it more up close and for probably a longer period of time, that within the nonprofit sector, there's this mind shift that happens, and it's not just about how do I earn money to sustain my mission, it's how do I actually get after root cause of the social problem that called me to this space in the first place, and how do I help liberate individuals, and that's that achieving of human capacity, the increasing of human capacity. And they want to do that. They don't want, what I've seen happen is increasingly among nonprofit executives that have this mind shift, they rediscover their passion for the field in the first place, and they say, yeah, that's what I want to do. I actually want to solve the problem. I never got into the space to be a big manager of the problem. I never got into the space to build market share of the social problem. And there's a reawakening of that passion to actually go back to the solving, the thing that they responded to in the first place, to sign up for a pretty difficult place. And then similarly for the for-profit leaders saying, yeah, I need to make a living, but it's more than that. There's got to be more than just amassing a lot of toys and retiring early. How do I have significance and know that my work, what I devote myself to, really is more than just a dollar-denominated value proposition. I want social value as well. So that's what I wanted to offer up about what's happened in the nonprofit sector as well as the for-profit future business leaders, and then the rise of what I would say legal entity and capital flow to back up the growth. But David, what would you share?
Yeah, I think that it's a fantastic way to frame the broad context in which this sort of blurring of the lines is taking place. And if we go a little further into sort of like the practical, what does it mean, for each organization, and why are organizations thinking this way? Why would it even make sense for a nonprofit to get involved in business type activities, or for an organization that wants to solve a problem to structure itself as a business? And so what we're finding is there's very clear questions that organizations can ask themselves. One of them is very simple. Are there any economies of scale in what you do? If there are, you may find over the long run that a business is the best way and the least painful way to raise the money you'll need to grow if you want. If there are no economies of scale, it may not make sense at all to go into a business and try to capture revenues. That's one thing. Another question people are asking themselves is, how do we even know if if it makes sense to make these decisions? And so it turns out that a very important. I'm hearing some weird noises. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yeah,
am I coming through?
Yeah, okay. You're coming through. We're hearing on our side too, but you are coming through. So thank you.
Oh,
go ahead.
Yeah. So just on a very practical note, I mean, whenever sectors, the lines between sectors blur, there are a particularly important group of people who are the intermediaries and the sort of the bridge people. And they essentially play the role of being translators, conceptual translators. So what we're seeing now all across the world actually is people who can speak the business language and understand the business mindset, who want to get involved in social problem solving, and people who come from a social problem solving background who get into the business world and sort of figure out what they bring in terms of many people who have been working in the nonprofit world are enormously creative when it comes to mobilizing resources and leveraging they don't have an IT department who will solve their problems. They have to just sort of figure out, how do we serve 1,000 kids on a budget of $10 each or something, and they sort of figure out what they can do. So the creativity around resource use is often very high in the nonprofit sector, whereas the business sector has 3 centuries of deliberate sector-building activities that have led to a systematic understanding of how to address certain kinds of problems. And so the bridge people, the people who can walk back and forth from one type of organization and another and can build both trust but also be these sort of translators of frameworks, become really, really valuable. And any business school or any university like Marquette, helping these people to identify them, to self-identify as sort of bridge people and to prepare themselves to be these kind of bridge people, they play this wonderfully galvanizing role in any community. And this isn't something that I'm taking from Malcolm Gladwell, who talked about the role of connectors. If you go back 60 years to Jane Jacobs when she was writing her great book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, she specifically identified people that she called hop-skip people. That was the term she used, hop-skip people. And these are the people who are able to jump from one part of the world to another part of the world. Eleanor Roosevelt being the greatest example in her generation, and who could so bring society together in new configurations by virtue of their own sort of magnetic pull and their own experience. So my recommendation is for any organization is to specifically look for people and how you can structure in experiences for people to give them these additional frameworks so that they can be, because they're extra valuable.
You've been talking about social innovation also, and you've just ended that response with talking about individuals. So really, if it's Mohammed Yunus or it's that one person that has the idea, that has that spark, that passion, that commitment to solving a problem. do you see that as a trend, or or going back to that sense? Do you see social innovation taken up by organizations, and again by organizations I mean existing, so it is teams of creative people, or again is it that one person that sparks an innovation within an organization or outside of an organization?
I mean, it's very often, in my experience, and we all see different parts of the world. We often find people very often start new things, will start a new project or come up with an idea because they get to a point where something is just driving them crazy. I mean, they just cannot see another kid treated this way in the pediatrics ward. Or Jeff was talking about Jill Violet's work, which really works in public schools to bring a culture of play initially in the recess and lunch periods. I mean, she wasn't hanging around in schools for many years, and she couldn't stand the fact that the kids were so miserable in the playground because they didn't actually know how to organize their own games. Their parents hadn't given them enough time outside, or the streets weren't safe enough so that they hadn't had those early play experiences to learn how to organize their own games. As a result, they were always fighting. So she got this really distressed her, and she finally said, I'm going to have to do something about this. So social change always begins with an I'm going to have to do something about this moment, where somebody gets, the level of need to act become, it's kind of like April 14th with your tax return. It's like suddenly you've just got to do it, And after that, the next question is the person blocked? And very often, if they're in a traditional organization, a traditional nonprofit, they'll find they have some really interesting ideas, and they go around them, they discuss it with people, and they find that the traditional institution blocks their energy in ways that becomes really difficult for them to act on this idea. That's when you often see people going off on their own and starting their own new organization. It's very classic. More and more, what we really need is intrapreneurs, people who are able to lead change within institutions without necessarily having to go out and start something new. Because change has to become much more in the norm in every organization. Every institution has to go through many, many cycles of iterative changes to cope with so many global changes that are occurring around us now. So I would say that one really important area to focus on over the next 10 years will be the role of intrapreneurs, people who are social entrepreneurs but can work within traditional structures. I mean, Jeff is a classic example. He's an intrapreneur at Marquette University. He's leading the university in a whole new direction that without him, it's very likely it would go in that direction. And he has to really, really work in very, very very creative ways to guide that organization, that huge organization with tremendous tradition and a very, very strong culture, to move that along in baby steps toward a different way of thinking about its educational mission. An enormously powerful and creative and difficult job, but that's I think one of the real important new futures of social entrepreneurship.
Thank you, David.
Yes, go ahead.
I wanted to add, I heard a leader of another institution comment recently, tongue-in-cheek, that he was somewhat new to the institution and was taken by, and this is a very senior individual, and he was taken by the number of conversations that he had had with other leaders, but they would refer to the institution in the third person, like it was somebody else, and he after maybe a month or so, that little honeymoon period, said, well, wait a minute, when we keep talking about the institution in the third person, that's us, right? Aren't we the ones that are actually leading this? And I find that to be true in many different walks of life, that sometimes our default is within an organization, to David's point about intrapreneur, to be thinking about it as it must be for somebody else to make those decisions. It must be for the institution. When you say, as David mentioned at the top, organizations, institutions are made up of people, and at some point, for those that, or maybe it's one or two that can find each other and serve that catalytic role, boy, is that powerful, because it is the power of one good idea, and then as David says, it's a lot of I find it a lot of fun and very fulfilling to have that sense of creativity to, in the case of a university setting, for example, to learn to speak, try to learn to speak multiple languages that are specific to a discipline to show how the research, the scholarship, the learning, the community engagement, the value propositions of that discipline to the world align with the social innovation, social entrepreneurship call to solve the social problem. So I don't suggest that for everyone, but I personally find it a lot of fun, and working with David and others to help accomplish that can be great. And then within the nonprofit organizations, and I'm guessing a good portion of this audience comes from that slice of life, that's a challenge that they can step up to too. That they are in a leadership role. They're on this call for a reason, because they see some alignment with their work, what they're trying to fulfill professionally. And boy, I just encourage you to find that sense of agency, to step out, serve in that catalytic role, ask the tough questions, and then try to realign from the problem management of the owning of market share to instead actually moving towards solution, and start to build camaraderie and build a team to move the organization. It's doable. It's difficult at times, but it's doable, and I think you find a deep sense of satisfaction in the process.
God, I could just go on with this conversation forever. I have several other questions before we open it up to the rest of the group, and one of them is, both of you have mentioned capital, social innovation, venture capitalists, and so forth. To be able to talk a little bit about, maybe David, from a national perspective, what you've been seeing as far as social innovation funding trends, and maybe then taking it to a Wisconsin level, as far as Jeff telling us a little bit about what is happening here in Wisconsin as far as not only growing the social innovation sector but also funding the social innovation sector. So David, with all of your journeys across the world and across the United States, if you could share some of those observations, that would be fabulous.
So there's a couple of sort of major trends that are happening in funding. I mean, Jeff mentioned before the sort of the social or impact investing space, where you have in sort of a subset of philanthropy that is very specifically looking at using philanthropic or quasi-business or soft business resources, or very rarely full-on business financing, but you often have a subset of investment that is looking at putting money into organizations that pursue multiple bottom lines. So the classic is the double or the triple bottom line. And so there's a number of reports that have looked at where this investment is coming from, how much is it growing, and so forth. And there's quite a lot of really good research on this. You can identify, there's something now called the Impact Assets 50, I believe. It's a list of the kinds of banks and the kinds of financing organizations that are available. It's still a fairly small amount of investment, but it's certainly a growing area of investment. But I think the other and probably bigger pie, ultimately down the road, much bigger pie actually if you look about it, is redeploying the traditional social service investments, both from the government and from philanthropy, based on the level of dynamism and innovation of an idea and the level of evidence that it actually works. So for example, President Obama's 2014 budget is the first budget in the history of the United States that specifically says that social programs that mobilize evidence, and the more rigorous the better, for their effectiveness, will be given preferential treatment in budget deliberations. Now you'd think that that's kind of like, well yeah, we should all the time, but this is really new. The move towards a kind of actuarial kind of analysis, an evidence-based approach in social change, is very dramatic. It really mirrors what happened in medicine over the past 60 years. It's not really widely known, but we really only started testing drugs in very rigorous ways in the 1960s to make sure that they actually worked and that they actually were safe. Now, of course, it's unthinkable that a drug wouldn't be tested for both safety and efficacy, but that was the norm up until only 50 years ago. What we're finding, moving forward with social change is that more and more there's going to be a lot of creative efforts into asking these hard questions about how well is something working, how well is it working per dollar spent, is it in the top 5 of competitive models for how to address the problem of dropouts, or how to prepare kids for kindergarten success, or how to reduce drug dependency, or how to reduce gun violence, or any of the questions that lots of social organizations work on. And over time, this is not like something that's going to happen quickly. It's going to happen over the next 10 or 20 or 30 years. But we're seeing a very deliberate move in medicine, in social services, in government policy making, in a whole variety of fields towards money beginning to follow better performing models. And so the big pot of money is not, necessarily these sort of subsets of philanthropy or of investing that have said we're going to target social impact. But the money that is already existing in the world, that is already supposedly supposed to advance social impact, but very often is not that effective. So everyone I speak to now who's a social entrepreneur is thinking about how can we better evaluate, or if possible, measure our success so that we can make a better argument that, our work should really grow. And that perhaps something else that's really wasteful should be put out of business. Those are really hard things. We hate to put nonprofits out of business. We're very reluctant to do that. Legally, it's extremely difficult to do it. But of course, any innovation cycle has new entrants and people that go out of business and merge with other entrants. And so thinking of the sustainability of a forest doesn't mean that every tree stays standing forever. It just means that the trees that are too old fall and get reabsorbed in the rest of the forest. So if we think in those terms and the larger pies of money that are available, I think that's so that's where the really big gains are going to be made over the next 10 or 20 years.
And do you see pockets of social innovation across the U.S., more so in one area than in the other, either in sector or in geographic distribution?
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
And where?
So where the need is greatest, there's an enormous amount of innovation around the issue of public education today. I mean, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations that are looking at the challenge from every angle conceivable. I mean, if you think of the computer, you've got the mouse, you've got the cables, you've got the integrated circuit, you've got the screen, all of the things that had to be innovated in order for somebody to build a computer. You're seeing that with education now. People are working on teacher training. They're working on student motivation. They're working on better models of curriculum. They're working on better ways to structure the school day. How do you use the after-school time better? What do we do to stem summer learning loss? I mean, there's just an enormous amount of innovation in education because it's being driven by need, it's being driven by policy. And that at the same time, you see these hubs. Universities are often extremely powerful hubs for networks of social innovators as well. I mean, the classic is of course Silicon Valley, where you see not only technical innovation but a lot of social innovation as well. But there are other places around the country too. One of the things, and I think Jeff has really pointed this out, and that's why his work in Milwaukee is so powerful, is that there is this kind of, so he calls it, what did you call it, the curve or something. He draws a big line around the U.S. map and shows that a lot of it is in these sort of coastal areas, and there's not a lot historically happening in the Midwest, and that's actually been a really important role that Marquette is playing in driving, in sort of becoming the hub of Midwest social innovation.
There's a group of about 24, roughly it's 22 changemaker campuses. These are U.S. institutions that are willing to step out and learn from the work of Ashoka, and the institutions that are embracing social innovation as this powerful tool for interdisciplinary learning, this framework for life. And if you plot where these schools are located across the map of the U.S., you'd see a preponderance all coastal, going from, say, call it Stanford down to ASU, over to Duke and Tulane, and then up the North Atlantic coast. Well, when you connect those dots, it looks like a smiley face across the bottom of the U.S. And then there's one little dot, sort of a misaligned nose in the middle of the country, and that's Marquette in the upper Midwest. Well, we're trying to change that. We're all about working with as many schools as possible. And I would say across the spectrum of social innovation, social entrepreneurship, they needn't be schools. We're interested in practitioners, funders. If you enjoy this space and you want to learn more, I would submit humbly that Marquette is eager to learn from you and work with you so we can build out the capacity in the upper Midwest. And it's not proprietary to any one school. Its problems are pretty big. If you like this stuff, there's no shortage of work, so we can roll up our sleeves and get a lot more stuff done and solve a lot more problems together. So that's the line that David was referring to, the smiley face.
So when you also think about Wisconsin, and again that nose in the middle, and growing that nose through Marquette, but do you see pockets in Wisconsin, or do you see places in Wisconsin where social innovation is occurring at a faster pace possibly, or just, what do you see in terms of Wisconsin, the appetite for social innovation as far as looking at for changes to the very problem?
So David, part of stepping over if you had a quick thought, but at the risk of maybe distancing people on the call that are from parts of the state that I'm not going to mention, my apologies in advance. I'm eager to hear from everyone to say, you got it wrong, I'm over here in Madison, I'm over here in La Crosse, Eau Claire, or whatever, so we're out here. But with that caveat, I would say the Fox Valley has been such a fun burgeoning of social innovation, social entrepreneurship. And I'd like to do just 1 minute on why I think that's true. And I'm going to start with why I personally, just in my little slice of life, found that a worthwhile investment of time and energy. And it was largely because it was a fertile field. It was a very receptive, an open mind to try to do things better and get after solutions. And it was less a challenge to disabuse, in this case, the social service sector in the Fox Valley. It was less a challenge to disabuse some of the stakeholders because with the absence of so much infrastructure. And let me draw a contrast to, say, Milwaukee County. Again, with apologies, I don't mean to be offensive to anybody, but just in my own little journey working in Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, we've seen a more than 50% growth of the charitable sector in 1 decade. So say 2000 as the baseline. There are now over 8,300 charities. And that's not a bad thing, but if they're focused on solving problems and working together, great. If it's more about building market share and then calling that success and raising more and more money to build more market share and more management, I would say that's part of the problem. And that's not just on the organizations, but on the funders and others that maybe just need to hit a timeout button and ask ourselves some tough, intellectually honest questions. So let me do a little deeper dive on that statistic. You have more than 50% growth in 501c3s in Milwaukee County, over 8,300. In that same timeline, the population in Milwaukee stays flat. It's about 600,000. That doesn't change much. But we tip into the billion-dollar fundraising category. Milwaukee accounts for about half of all the charitable dollars that flow through the state of Wisconsin. So we're $1 billion plus annually. In that time frame, the percentage of Milwaukeeans living in poverty grows by about 25%. So how do we have such a robust growth of the charitable sector, both in the number of 501c3s and in fundraising, but something as simple as poverty and all the health indicators that go along with that are not showing the positive signs that we would assume with the growth of that sector. So I'm simply saying, can we do better? And in the case of the Fox Valley, there was a receptiveness, a willingness to question meaningfully. There's a really cool social enterprise coming online up there called Riverview Gardens in downtown Appleton. In a spirit of full disclosure, I'm on the board of that, so that's my transparency moment. But conversely, in Milwaukee, I think there's so much infrastructure and so many stakeholders around the way things are presently that it's just a different level of energy, a different level of investment to try to disabuse some current thinking and be disruptive to the status quo, that I thought the Fox Valley would be a little better ROI for that investment of time and energy. But I'm hopeful that Milwaukee and other parts of the state can take note of what's happening in the Fox Valley and then want to replicate that in their respective communities. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
And I'm going to wrap. I want to add one thought to that, but also Tom is going to ask some questions that have been asked of the panel, of David and Jeff. And I just want to say to the Fox Valley area is the fact that we have the privilege, Forward Community Investments does, of working around the state. And truly, in terms of the Fox Valley, is where we do see some innovation really occurring. I would say the Fox Valley and also Wisconsin Rapids. And but really looking at the mindset being one of collaboration and partnership between sectors. And so it's not just a matter of we have a problem, you go out and solve it. It really is, we have a problem and we're going to solve it together. And really that marriage between the funders, the community, and the nonprofit world is just really so impressive. So I just wanted to add that. And Tom does have some questions.
Okay, I received these questions throughout the webinar to ask our panelists. Are there any thoughts on scaling up a solution that has been successfully deployed by an organization's founder when he or she is moving on? For example, intersective founder syndrome and social innovation. This is an environmental solution that is difficult to monetize.
So I don't know that particular example. Do you know that one, Jeff?
I don't, but I hear in Tom's question there's a sense of a founder or innovator of the thought, the leader, and that person is transitioning out of the organization. Is that correct, Tom?
Yes.
Okay.
That is what I'm gathering.
Yeah. So the challenge, what I infer from that, and pardon a $10 opinion on a nickel's worth of information, but what I infer from that is how does the solution become embedded organizationally and then sustained, even though the driver, the catalytic individual, if you will, that brought the idea of the innovation online in the first place is leaving. Boy, that's a great depth of bench question, and I would strive for, come at it two ways. One is operationally, who is in the deliverable side of the house that does the programs to fulfill the mission or whatever the organization is, and who's a rock star in that mix that you could get to, and then also on the other side, the governance. Who is a board member or a senior leader that you could also get to and have between the governance leadership side and the actual deliverer of the programs, goods, or services, to have two people at a minimum so they can know that each other is on the same page and help hopefully sustain whatever the innovation was and keep it going. David?
So I'll address the scale issue since Jeff was looking at the continuity issue. The founder syndrome is every organization obviously goes through this period of handoff. It's like whether the person running it really wants the idea to succeed without them, or they really sort of at some possibly unconscious level kind of wish that it won't, which proves how superhuman they are. The question of how that plays out is really how deliberate these people are about making sure that things are not contingent only on them being there. And that's a process that every organization has to go through, and many don't. In terms of scale, I see it as a completely separate question. The way an organization can scale is a really, really very, very, very difficult question to answer, and an important one. So the one thing that I would say, since it's so complex, is it's important to separate the issue of scale as we normally think of, which is like we get bigger, our budget gets bigger, we have more people, we serve more kids, whatever that might be, and the issue of scale of impact, which is we end up having a bigger influence and impact on society. And So there's a definition, one of the classic definitions of entrepreneurship, which comes from some professor, I believe he's from Harvard Business School, I believe. But one of them is entrepreneurs, one of the things that defines them is they leverage resources that they do not control. So I'll say that again, they leverage resources they do not control, which is to say they get other people to do stuff without having to pay them to do it. And ultimately, the most impact, the greatest scale I've seen in any organizations, and I've looked at really hundreds and hundreds, is when organizations are able to do something in such a way that they can get 10 other organizations to do something similar with reasonable effectiveness, or down the road they can change the policies, or they can get, ultimately the way we think about scale in a world where information travels so quickly and so many people are defining themselves as creative actors, needs to be to some degree connected to the idea that we are all connected in some sort of a network, and that what we're doing is not just relevant for our community, but is relevant potentially to any community that is like our community. And how do we think about that as a potential part of our challenge? How do we make sure that other people hear about this work, that we ourselves are able to describe our work in such a way that other people can pick it up? If you're thinking about scale, I would say that those are really important questions to be asking, rather than what can we do and how can we raise $5 more million so that we can do it at 3 times the level we're doing it today. That's the level of demonstration of an idea doesn't have to be huge for that idea to have a lot of power. And to make my point, the organization in India that has probably had the biggest influence on India's disability movement, and I'm not kidding, is called the National Center for Employment of Disabled People, and they have 8, maybe 10 people on staff. It's true, but they have this extraordinarily leveraged impact because they've created a network strategy, and they've really changed the history of the country vis-a-vis disability with really a handful of people. It's quite extraordinary. In the United States, the same is true. The organization that did the same role in the U.S. was called DREDF, D-R-E-D-F, Disabled Rights Education and Defense Fund, and they also had a network strategy and had an enormous impact by aligning the behavior of many, many other disability groups and aligning the communications to advance initially the Americans with Disabilities Act, but then many other policies. So that's just different ways of thinking of scale.
And I really applaud and emphasize the leveraging of assets that you don't control. That's such a key ingredient. And David, I was thinking too about resources, because we're obviously reaching the end, and I got to believe whether it's scale, collective impact, that the Stanford Social Innovation Review website would be a good resource. I wonder if you have, and Sally, I'm throwing in a question, I know that's more your role, but I was wondering if we wanted to ask David if he has a resource or two that he would suggest too. So that there's probably 15 topics that we haven't touched on, but where would we direct people to go? And for me, Stanford Social Innovation Review, that website is a great spot to look. And David, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it sort of depends on what you're looking for. I think if you're looking for examples of how organizations can be innovative, there's some of the networks of social entrepreneurs like the Ashoka, Echoing Green, Skoll, Draper Richards, have lots of good examples and stories that I think are quite helpful in seeing how other people have solved problems. If you're interested in social enterprise, there's a subset of social entrepreneurs that specifically look at the social enterprise challenge. The SOCAP network might be a very, very good network to be involved with for that. That's the Social Capitalist conference, but they also have a very wide network of stories and examples to look at, which is somewhat different from the more general social entrepreneurship question.
Yeah. Great. Sally?
And that's a perfect way, a perfect segue into closing this conversation, which could go on, as far as I'm concerned, for hours. But unfortunately, I know that people on the call must get back to work and to be innovative in their own way right now, and to think about and ponder about what was just discussed. So thank you to both David and to Jeff. And I'm going to turn this over to Tom right now. So again, thank you, and it was a delight.
Great. Thank you for everyone who participated and asked questions regarding any questions that they had throughout the webinar. This presentation they shared was very, very valuable, as with all of our other webinars, and we did record this webinar, and we will provide everyone, all of the attendees, a link on how to access the recording of this webinar. We would also encourage all participants to review our website at forwardci.org for more information on how FCI might help your organization. One final note, when you do close your browser from this session, you will be directed to a very concise questionnaire to evaluate today's webinar. We appreciate if you take a few minutes to complete and help us continue to improve the effectiveness of these hearings. Also, we'd like to thank BMO Harris Bank again for making this exceptional learning opportunity available. And like I had mentioned previously, we will be sending out an email to all attendees with the webinar recording, as well as the links that David and Jeff and Sally all referenced. So thank you very much for your time. Hope everybody enjoyed their time as much as we did, and have yourself a good rest of your Tuesday afternoon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you again.